Welcome to Monsters Among Us podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 19, the JAL Flight 1628 UFO Encounter. So today we're doing a deep dive into, well, a really famous case in UFO circles. The JAL Flight 1628 incident over Alaska back on November 17th, 1986.
Right, involving a Japan Airlines cargo plane, a big one, a Boeing 747-200F. It was flying from Paris to Narita, Japan, but planned a stop in Anchorage, Alaska.
And the core of this, the thing that really makes it stand out, is the pilot's report. Captain Kenji Terauchi.
Exactly. He claimed he saw 3 unidentified objects. And what we really want to focus on today are his descriptions, especially the sheer size he reported and the glowing lights. That's where the detail gets fascinating.
Okay, so let's set the scene. When and where did this actually start?
It kicked off around 17:11 local time over eastern Alaska. The plane was up high, cruising altitude 35,000 feet. Captain Terauchi's first report to air traffic control mentioned these 3 objects. He said they were initially flying parallel and then very close.
Very close. And the descriptions he gave, especially in news reports later, they were pretty wild. He talked about 2 small ships and the mothership.
Right, and that comparison he made, saying the bigger one was twice the size of an aircraft carrier. I mean, just pause and think about that. A 747 is enormous itself.
Yeah.
Imagining something that dwarfs an aircraft carrier next to it. Well, it's hard to picture.
And how did air traffic control react initially? You'd think a report like that would get some attention.
Oh, it did. Pretty quickly, actually. About 6 minutes after the first report, the FAA actually advised Captain Terauchi to take evasive action.
Really? So they were taking it seriously then?
It certainly seems like it. Even if they weren't seeing it on their scopes, the pilot's report was concerning enough for them to recommend a change in course. A precaution, you know.
And did he? Did he try to evade?
He did. He dropped altitude, and he even flew the 747 in a complete circle. But according to him, it didn't matter. He reported that the lights, these objects, just stayed right there with the plane.
So not just a quick flash, but something persistent, according to his account.
Persistent, yes. Even through maneuvers meant to shake them.
Okay, so we have this incredibly detailed visual report from the cockpit. What about the technology? What do the radars show?
Well, that's where things diverge quite dramatically. Despite Captain Terauchi seeing these, huge objects, the FA in Anchorage, their radar only showed one target, JAL Flight 1628.
Just the plane. No other blips corresponding to what he was describing.
Nope, nothing solid.
Were there other planes around? Maybe someone else saw something.
There were. A United Airlines flight and an Air Force C-130 cargo plane were in the relative vicinity, but neither crew reported seeing anything unusual visually.
And their own radar. On the planes themselves.
Also nothing. Completely clear, according to their reports. So you've got the pilot's vivid account here.
And then absolutely zero corroboration from ground radar or other aircraft radar and visuals. That's a major disconnect.
It is. Now, there were some early news reports, you know how it is, suggesting maybe the FAA did see something initially. But later reviews, more careful analysis, kind of walked that back.
How so?
Well, some military radar returns were dismissed as probable clutter, basically, radar noise or interference.
Okay.
And there was apparently a brief blip on the FAA radar near the 747, but the official explanation became that it was likely a split image of Flight 1628 itself. That can happen sometimes with strong signals, atmospheric effects.
A sort of radar ghost.
Essentially, yeah. And controllers down in Fairbanks also confirmed they only ever tracked the one aircraft, JAL 1628.
Still, even without that confirmation, the duration he claimed is pretty staggering.
It really is. He reported these objects followed him, shadowed the plane, for about 640 kilometers.
That's 400 miles. That's a long time to be seeing something, whether it's real or misidentified.
Exactly. A very long time.
So when they landed in Anchorage, what happened then? Did the FAA talk to them?
Yes, they did. The FAA debriefed the entire flight crew, Captain Terauchi, the co-pilot, the flight engineer. And interestingly, the FAA's own assessment of the crew was quite positive.
In what way?
They described them, and this is a quote, as normal, professional, rational, and had no drug or alcohol involvement.
So whatever they saw or thought they saw, the FAA didn't think they were impaired or, making things up maliciously. They seemed credible.
Their professional assessment pointed to credible witnesses, yes. Which makes the whole thing even more puzzling.
Right, because if the crew seems reliable, but the tech doesn't back it up, what gives? Have people tried to explain what Terauchi might have actually seen?
Oh, definitely. Alternative explanations came up pretty quickly. One of the main ones came from Philip J. Klass.
The UFO skeptic.
That's him, a well-known aviation writer, very skeptical of UFO reports. He proposed that what Captain Terauchi saw were likely planets, specifically Jupiter and Mars.
Planets. But he described ships, one huge one. How could planets look like that?
Well, Klass's argument was that even very experienced pilots can sometimes misidentify bright celestial objects, especially under unusual conditions. He pointed out that Jupiter was quite bright and low on the horizon from their perspective at that time.
Okay.
So from the cockpit looking out, it could potentially create an illusion of being much closer, maybe even at their altitude of 35,000 feet, and perhaps appearing much larger or brighter than expected due to atmospheric effects.
I suppose that's possible, but twice the size of an aircraft carrier. That seems like a big stretch for Jupiter.
It does sound like a stretch, absolutely. But Klass also looked at other factors. He pointed out that when the crew members were interviewed separately a couple of years later, in 1988, some inconsistencies apparently emerged in their accounts.
Ah, the reliability of memory over time. That always complicates things.
It does. And Klass also brought up something else, a statement from an FAA spokesperson. Apparently, after reviewing the initial air traffic tapes, the spokesperson said that Terauchi had, at first, reported losing sight of the object after he made that turn.
Wait, but didn't he later claim it stayed with him through the turn and maneuvers?
Exactly. That's a direct contradiction, according to Klass, based on that FAA source. If true, it does raise questions about how the story evolved.
That's a significant detail. It changes the narrative from persistent shadowing to maybe a more intermittent sighting.
Potentially, yes. And there's another layer here. The FAA apparently had a label for Captain Terauchi.
Oh.
They reportedly called him UFO repeater, meaning this wasn't the first time he'd reported seeing something unexplained.
He'd made other reports before and after.
Both, it seems. And one specific instance afterwards, January 11th, 1987, so just a couple of months later, is interesting. He was flying in the same general area over Alaska again and reported seeing irregular pulsating lights and what he called a large black chunk ahead of his plane.
And did radar see anything that time?
Nope. Same story. FAA radar showed nothing unusual. That particular sighting was eventually suggested to be maybe diffused lights from villages on the ground, maybe seen through ice crystal clouds, creating weird optical effects.
So a pattern of reporting unusual aerial phenomena that weren't corroborated.
That seems to be the case documented by the FAA.
Did Terauchi himself ever say what he thought they were, beyond just unidentified?
He did use quite specific language. He reportedly used terms like spaceship and mothership, and he seemed quite convinced, apparently stating things like, "We humans will meet them in the near future."
Okay, so he clearly had some strong beliefs about extraterrestrial possibilities.
It certainly sounds like it. He also apparently speculated that the mothership intentionally did not want to be seen, perhaps explaining the lack of radar contact.
Which brings us back to the observers themselves. How objective were they?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Robert Schieffer, another investigator who looks into these things skeptically, he pointed out that Terauchi's prior beliefs in these kinds of statements suggest he maybe wasn't approaching this as a completely unbiased or objective observer.
Right. If you're already inclined to believe in alien craft, maybe you interpret ambiguous lights differently than someone else would.
Precisely. And science writer Brian Dunning took a similar stance. He looked at the whole case and basically concluded there was likely nothing extraordinary or unusual happening. He felt Terauchi was hardly unbiased when it came to alien spaceships and saw the whole thing as more of an anecdote than solid evidence.
So wrapping this up, it's a classic case in many ways. You have this really compelling, detailed first-hand account from professionals. A seasoned captain describing these massive glowing objects doing extraordinary things. The size descriptions are just incredible.
They really are. And the crew seemed credible at the time, according to the FAA's assessment.
But then you have the complete lack of corroborating evidence. No radar, no other witnesses.
Right. And plausible, if maybe not fully satisfying, alternative explanations like misidentified planets or atmospheric phenomena.
Plus questions about consistency in the testimony over time and the pilot's own apparent predisposition to believe in UFOs.
It really highlights the challenge. Terauchi's detailed descriptions, especially of the size and the lights, keep the story alive. It's captivating.
But without that solid external proof, and with these other factors in play, it remains firmly in the realm of the unexplained. maybe even the misinterpreted.
A true aviation mystery. It forces you to weigh eyewitness testimony against instrumental data and consider the psychology of perception.
That is the end of this episode. Until next time. Keep to the shadows. Some legends are best left undiscovered.